Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 207 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Kevin Robertson is back again today to talk about hyena hunting. Now, hyenas are a very misunderstood creature, and let's be frank here. Everything, or at least most, of what you think you know about hyenas is wrong. As you'll learn here shortly, they are literally the complete opposite of the stupid, dirty, mangy, cowardly scavengers they are made out to be in the media. Don't feel bad, because I had the same misconceptions about that myself until this interview. Now, you'll see what I mean about all of that here in a few minutes. Before we get started, make sure you sign up for my email list at huntingguns101.com. You'll get my free ebook when you do that, and you'll also get the email updates I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, you will love those emails. I also send out an in-stock ammo email update every Friday to everyone on the list with some of the latest news on ammo I found and where you can get it. And I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy those emails. That's huntingguns101.com. Next, make sure you pick up copies of Kevin's books. It Shouldn't Happen is a delightfully entertaining collection of some pretty darn funny stories Kevin has accumulated over his years of living and hunting in Africa. I guarantee you'll laugh out loud when you read some of them. Now, if you have an upcoming hunt in Africa, or if you're just dreaming about hunting in Africa one day, then you need to buy a copy of The Perfect Shot 2 and carefully study what he has to say. The information inside it is invaluable, and it reflects his decades of hard-earned experience as a professional hunter in Africa. If you pay attention to what he has to say and use the book as a guide to prepare you for your hunt, you will increase your odds of success, reduce the chances of something going wrong, and just have more fun over there. Plus, it's just really entertaining as well. Go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin to learn more about those books, and you can purchase a copy of them there to help support the Big Game Hunting Podcast and Kevin in the process. Okay, now let's get started talking about hyenas. Okay, good evening, Kevin. Once again, great to talk to you.
Yes, good evening, John. Nice to be back.
You know, I think at least with the average person here in the United States, I think that hyena are often misunderstood animals that, sometimes people think they're stupid, ugly, cowardly, just kind of all the negative adjectives you can think of kind of get lumped onto hyena for those that don't know better. And I'm interested to talk to you about this and learn a little bit more about hyena tonight. I love starting off with the story with you because you always have such good ones. So do you have an interesting hyena story to share with us?
I do. I've had quite a bit of a hyena experience, and let me explain why. So in the early 1990s, that's 91 and 92, Zimbabwe experienced a prolonged drought. And in their wisdom, the powers that be of the Zimbabwe Department of National Parks and Wildlife Management decided they needed to cull 10,000 impala in the Zambezi Valley. And this was to take place on various camps along the Zambezi River. But because of foot and mouth restrictions, if you remember, I told you that the buffalo in the Zambezi Valley are all carriers of foot and mouth. Mm-hmm. No bones were allowed out of the Zambezi Valley. So in all your trophies, when you're hunting in the Zambezi Valley, if you're taking out skulls, they all had to be boiled clean and then dried. And your skins had to be salted and dried, and only could leave the valley when they were dry. But no bones were allowed to leave the Zambezi Valley. So they started culling these impala, but only the meat of the impala could be taken out. And meat, as I've said before, is a very precious commodity, or protein is a very precious commodity in Africa. But the meat had to be salted and dried to the consistency of a dried stick. And in those years, I also remember I mentioned that Zimbabwe was exporting beef to the European Economic Union at that same time. So the veterinary department was very switched on, and they were inspecting all this meat that was going out. And over that time, one of the local businessmen came to try to strike a deal with Catherine, my wife, because if there were 10,000 impala were going to be culled, he wanted to tan the skins and turn them into leather, because the impala skin makes a beautiful, supple, soft leather, which they then wanted to make leather jackets to sell in Europe, because, everybody in Europe likes wearing leather jackets, black leather jackets.
Mm-hmm.
So this businessman came to Cass, my wife, and said, listen, they wanted to build a tannery on my farm, and they wanted to use some of the wives of my laborers to teach them how to become seamstresses to sew these jackets. But at the end, we looked at the feasibility of it, and it didn't work out, because once you build the tannery and got all their factory up and running, once they'd really finished your 10,000 skins, then there was no other source of impala skin, so the whole thing fell through. Also, it was just as well as it turned out, because the impala were culled at night. And by the early 1990s, all the competent European rangers in the Department of National Parks, the guy that had done all the elephant culling and all that, and who had been very competent to cull all these impala, had been basically forced out of the department, and it was left to the local people who have now taken their place. And I also mentioned that the last elephant cull was in 1985, and three of the four guys shot themselves on that cull. So you can imagine the competency of these guys that were doing the culling. So they culled this impala at night with a spotlight, but they just used AK-47s and sort of military rounds. So it was not all that effective, and quite a few of these impala were wounded. And the Bobby Hunters Association eventually actually went to national parks with a complaint that, because people that were hunting in the area were seeing all these impala that were, being badly shot and were still alive. But what it did, so all the skins of 10,000 impala, all the bones and all the intestines for 10,000 impala were eventually, over about an 18-month period, were just dumped in the Zambezi Valley, which was the ideal food source for the local hyena population. And the local hyena population just exploded. And at that time, unfortunately, there was a concurrent outbreak of feline panleukopenia, which is a feline viral disease, also known as feline AIDS, which affects the immune system, which affected the lion population in the Zambezi Valley. So you had this unique situation where the hyenas were doing really well with all this abundant food, and then the lions were taking flack because of this viral disease. So the delicate balance that exists between lion and hyena got tilted in the favor of the hyenas, and the hyena population just exploded. And that was the time when I got my professional hunting license and started hunting commercially, or taking safaris to the Zambezi Valley. And man, the hyenas there were just, they were a nuisance. Everything, if you left your boots outside overnight, they were gone. The hyenas would steal the soap out the shower. One hyena even took a full petrol tank from my fishing boat, carried it off and chewed it up.
Oh.
So, they were just an absolute pain. And so when you started hunting, from then onwards, you try and correct the balance of get the numbers right again. Every hunt that was conducted in the Zambezi Valley in those early 1990 years, you had to shoot a hyena. It was obligatory. You had to shoot a hyena. And so, it was great fun, because hunting a hyena was tremendous good fun. But the Zimbabwe Hunters Association also used to hunt in the Reefer Safari area. And there was a farmer from Goma called Horsley, and he was just on an impala hunt. He would have to shoot a hyena, so he baited for them and shot the biggest hyena, which happened to be a female. And when he got to this female, he noticed that she was heavily pregnant, and actually she had more killer teeth. And while he was looking at her, he watched her. You could see her stomach moving. So he quickly cut her open, and out of her uterus, he produced a hyena cub. And hyenas are what they call precordial, which basically means precocidal, which means the cubs are born with their eyes open, and they already have teeth when they're born. Hyenas not much the size of a large dog, like a St. Bernard or something like that. And even dogs that have a 63-day gestation period, but hyenas have a 110-day gestation period, which is the same gestation period length as a lion, for example. But when the cubs are born, they're born pretty advanced. Their eyes open, they've got teeth, and within a couple of minutes they can walk, and within a day or two They can play and run and things like that. And hyena cubs are cute. They're born pitch black, and they're actually cute little things. So this guy, and there was some milk in the teeth of this hyena. He'd shot, so he managed to get this little hyena to suckle, and he managed to milk out some of the milk. Took it back to camp, and hyena milk is very rich in protein and has a very high fat content, which with a few phone calls, you suddenly realize that if you take ordinary cow's milk and into a teacup, you put a tablespoon of full cream, and you add the yolk of one egg, that pretty much mimics what a hyena, consistency of hyena milk. And he fed this hyena, and it survived, and it grew, and it became his pet. And it was actually tame, and he used to be in the house, and he treated it just like a dog. And he used to drive around on his pickup truck, and on the back of his pickup truck, he used to have this hyena. And you can imagine, because in Africa, the local indigenous population are extremely superstitious, and there's a connotation between hyenas and witches and witch doctors and sort of evil spirits and things like that. So the locals were horrified. I mean, this guy used to drive into town and go into the bank, and everybody would look out there on the back of his truck. Would be a hyena, and it was like his dog. He loved this thing, and it grew to maturity, and it was fully grown. And one day he was standing in his tobacco lands, watching his workers reap tobacco, and this hyena was sniffing around and walking around, and it suddenly just walked up to him and removed his calf muscle, put his calf muscle right out, just without any warning or hesitation. Just walked up to him and took a chunk of his calf muscle about the size of a grapefruit, and just swallowed it. I mean, absolutely bloody crippled it. So that poor hyena got swiftly disposed of, but this guy, for the rest of there's nothing they could do. All the muscle was missing in his calf muscle, and he had this withered leg, and he walked around with a walking stick after that, from just being his pet that he'd taken from the womb right up until it was a couple of years old, and it suddenly just one day just turned on him and bit him very badly.
My goodness, jeez.
Yeah, so you never really trust wild animals. And he thought it was his dog, but it wasn't. It was still a wild animal, even though it was tame. And it ended up just crippling him. But that gave us the opportunity to hunt lots of hyenas. But if you go, now I've said before, the movie The Lion King was very, very detrimental to African game animals, because the perception of people got of the animals in that movie was so different from what really happens in Africa. And exactly what the three hyenas that are portrayed in that movie, hyenas are exact opposites to that. They are highly intelligent animals they form very complex social behaviors. They reckon that hyenas are even more intelligent than chimpanzees, which is so, the chimpanzees.
Oh, wow, man.
Yeah. And they even reckon that hyenas can count, because it's an unusual situation. It's a matriarchal society. So the biggest, and the female hyenas are larger than the males. And then a female will weigh between 100 and 140 pounds, and a male between 90 to 120. So there's always the females. If you're hunting hyenas and everybody just chooses to go to shoot the biggest hyena, the biggest hyena is invariably a female. But it's a matriarchal society, and because of that, the hyenas have developed, the female hyenas have developed these male-like characteristics. Now, obviously, there's always a story going around that hyenas were hermaphrodites, which they are not. But the females have this pseudo-penis, it's called. But actually, it's the clitoris, which is enlarged, and it resembles a penis. It gets an erection, and it can drag on the ground. And they also have what they call pseudo-scrotum. Next to the base of their clitoris, they have these two fibrous sacs, which resemble a scrotum. And there's absolutely no way that you can tell the difference between a male and a female hyena unless you lift up the tail, and underneath the tail there's either one or there's two holes. If there's one hole, it's a male, and if there's two holes, it's a female. But they are not hermaphrodites. They just got developed in their evolution because the males were more aggressive. And as the females now became more dominant, the females now took on male characteristics. So they definitely look masculine and they look like males, or they're not. And so the females look like males, which is actually a way that they confuse the males. And because they're bigger and heavier, they are more dominant over the males. And they have these extremely powerful jaws. A hyena can crack open the femur of a giraffe, which is no other animal can do that. And that allows these powerful jaws. They reckon that jaws can withstand about 1,100 pounds per square inch of force. So they're extremely powerful. And that's what enables them to bite so strongly. They can rush up and bite a buffalo's testicles off, or they can rush up and just bite a great big chunk of meat out of an animal. But hyenas are, everybody thinks that they're scavengers, which is exactly not the case. They are a very effective predators. They are probably one of the most effective predators in Africa, and 60 to 90% of the food that they consume is from their own kills. In fact, hyenas kill more than lions do, and the lions often scavenge off hyena kills, which is the exact opposite to the other way around. Everybody thinks it's the hyenas or the scavengers, but they are extremely effective, and they're extremely adept predators. They're not fast. Their maximum running speed is about 37 kilometers an hour, but they have a large heart-lung capacity, which enables them to have enormous endurance. All the other game animals are not fit. A zebra is not a fit animal. A zebra can run quickly for 100 or 200 meters, but a zebra cannot battle to run 3 kilometers or 3 miles. And a hyena can easily run 3 miles at a sort of a fast, awkward, loping sort of pace. And they just run down their prey. They just run their prey until they're exhausted, and then they just kill them. So they are very, very adept and effective predators. Also,
very, very interesting. I want to say Robert Rourke talked about that in, I want to say The Horn of the Hunter or something like that, and talking about how you go out in the evening and you go out in the morning and you see these lions sitting around this dead animal that they quote unquote killed, with the hyenas kind of scattered all around them, like around the edges, and so. I've heard it say, just like you just said there, that in actuality that those hyenas probably killed that zebra or wildebeest or whatever it was themselves at night, started eating it, and then the lion came in and then kicked them off and claimed it for themselves then.
Yeah, that could be very true. That happens. Although you don't see it happen, but there's a wonderful movie called Eternal Enemy. Have you ever watched that movie?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I'll just make a note of that, and I'm sure you'll find it on YouTube or somewhere. It's about the continual struggle between lions and hyenas. They both hate each other, and at any opportunity they'll kill each other, and at any opportunity they'll kill their offspring. So there's this, as long as the balance of power is sort of balanced, they sort of coexist. But as soon as the balance is tipped in one direction or the other, as it occurred when all these impala were being culled, then the one species definitely dominates over the other species. Lions cubs are born with their eyes closed, and they're almost sort of useless for the first three weeks or so of their life. They're born with their eyes closed and they can't walk around. And they're very, very susceptible to predation from hyenas. If a hyena finds a lion cub like that, he'll just kill it and eat it straight away. As opposed to hyena cubs are born much more developed and much more advanced. And also the hyenas, they have dens underground in ant bear holes and stuff like that. So they're much more able to get away from lions. So there's this continual battle, but at the back of every lion's mind, he knows that one day the hyena is going to kill him and eat him. That's the majority of lions. If they're not killed and eaten by other lions, they certainly were killed and eaten by hyenas when they get too old to defend themselves. So there's this continual power struggle that sort of fluctuates backwards and forwards depending on the seasons and depending on various circumstances, which is all part of Africa.
Golly, isn't that the truth? So it seems like the spotted hyena is the much more common hyena species that lives in Africa, and that's what you had most of your experiences with up in the Zambezi. And then the brown hyena would be the other somewhat common species, right, in South Africa, Botswana, Namibia.
Yes, but brown hyenas have a much smaller distribution. They're a very different animal, very different. they live in deserts and semi-desert areas and rocky outcropping areas. And the big thing about them, they are not water dependent. You know, brown hyenas occur on the Skeleton Coast, you know, in Namibia, but there's no fresh water, you know, and they just live on the moisture that they get from the food that they scavenge on, you know, dead seals and things like that. So they can actually live without water, brown hyena, which a spotted hyena can't. He is a water dependent animal. But with the brown hyena, both sexes are roughly the same size. You know, the male is slightly larger than the female. He'll weigh between 90 and 100 pounds, and a female brown hyena will weigh between 80 and 90 pounds. But their social structure is very much different. You know, the spotted hyena, they live in clans, and those clans can be the biggest clan ever recorded. It had 130 members in it. You know, so you can imagine that is a very. And they have territories. The spotted hyena have territories, and those clans will then compete with each other for territories. So they have fights, and they don't venture into each other's territories, and they mark their territories with anal secretions and things like that. So very different from the brown hyena, which you normally have extended families of maybe 4 to 6 animals, never more than that. And they also defend their territories, and they mark their territories with what they call a thing called pasting, which is our anal secretions, and they smear these anal secretions onto shrubs and bits of grass, which sort of demarcates their territories. And also the gestation period of a brown hyena is a little bit shorter. It's 3 months, and they have about 1 litter every 20 months. And only in the sort of brown hyena family, only the dominant female, she breeds, which is not the case with hyenas. Hyenas, you know, all the females in a hyena pack will breed, but with brown hyenas, only the dominant female breeds, which is probably a reason why they're not nearly as common. Also, the areas where they live in, the food supply is a lot less. You know, they are absolute scavengers. They live on rodents, they live on insects and eggs and fruits and fungi, and they are very poor hunters. They don't really hunt for themselves, as opposed to brown or spotted hyenas, which are accomplished predators, as I mentioned. The brown hyena has excellent smell, but they are aggressive, what they call kleptoparasites, which means they steal the kills of other anthropoid jackals. They steal from cheetahs. They steal from leopards. And I sent you that video clip. Did you see of a brown hyena trying to take on a leopard bait with our leopard defending his leopard bait? Did you see that clip, guys?
I did, yeah. And it's funny, you know, the guy that I first went to hunt with in Africa, in Namibia, you know, he had leopard on his place, and would shoot 1 or 2 a year, baiting them like that. And it was not uncommon to have brown hyenas pop up on those baits, and they ended up shooting a couple of them almost by happenstance over the years, doing exactly that. Yeah,
so I've never hunted a brown hyena because I never really got the opportunity to hunt extensively in the areas where they occur. You know, they have a pretty limited range. I've seen brown hyenas, but I've never had the opportunity to hunt them. But what's the big thing about hunting hyenas, because they are so highly intelligent, boy, they learn really quickly. So if I go back to that story when we were having to obligatory to hunt a hyena in the Zambezi Valley, man, all the camp thieves and all the ones that were sort of real nuisance around the camp, those guys got shot pretty quickly. But then they became super switched on and super smart. You know, I believe a hyena hunt is almost a poor man's leopard hunt. You know, there's a very lot of similarities between it. And you have to go to almost as much forethought and planning for a hyena hunt that you had to do for a leopard hunt, which made it so challenging and which made it so fun to do. Because, you know, invariably if you had to shoot a hyena, invariably more than one on a bait, and you shoot one of them, and those other ones, that one that escaped, survived, they learned pretty quickly the situation, and they became super, super sneaky and crafty and intelligent, and wouldn't come to baits and things like that, and they would go and sniff out where the blind was, come and check the blind out first to see if there's anybody in the blind and things like that. They became really challenging animals to hunt, and that's what makes them such a fantastic trophy. You know, I think hyenas are probably one of the most underrated trophies in Africa, because to hunt a hyena successfully in an area where it's pretty wild and they've been exposed to some form of hunting pressure, they are as sneaky and as devious and as cunning as any leopard could be.
Are they, so in an area where you have a good spotted hyena population, I imagine their population density is a lot higher than is the case with leopard. Is that the case?
I would think so. There are lots of leopards, but you just don't see the leopards, so you don't really know. But hyenas, and you hear them, they're very vocal. They've got these two different types of calls. You asked me about the leopard. So they've got two distinct calling types. They have what they call their laugh or their giggle, which is actually an expression of social anxiety and uncertainty. So we used to say they laugh and giggle because their clitorises are dragging along the ground. But that's not really the case. Let me just, I've got a clip here. I just want to play to you. This is what the laugh and the giggle sounds like. So I'm sure you can imagine my description. That sounds pretty much like what's causing that.
That is a spooky sound to hear that, like outside your tent at night or something like that. Oof.
Yeah, you can just imagine there with saliva dripping out of their mouths and stuff like that. And then this is the whoop. And then the whoop is their long-range communication, how they communicate over long range. And the hyena can hear these whoops over a distance of about 3 miles. And this is what it sounds like. Have you heard that sound?
I've heard the whoops before. Yeah, I've heard that in South Africa and in Zimbabwe at night, when I'm kind of sitting around the campfire or in the tent trying to sleep.
Yeah, well, that's part of Africa. I mean, no African campfire is complete without those sounds around it at night, that's for sure. But they're two very distinctive. One is the giggles are for expressions of anxiety and uncertainty. So if an animal is investigating your camp, and so he'll come around and you'll get that giggling around the camp. He's sort of curious to know what's going on. But then in the distance, you hear the whoops. That's good communicating with each other. Because those clans, they don't always hunt as a clan or a pack. They will split up and then reconvene in the morning type of thing. So sometimes you get 2-3 hyenas together. You often get them as loners. They can be on their own at times. Wonderful animals. I've got quite an affinity for them because I just think they are so unique to Africa.
So you were saying that normally if you encounter a group of hyena and someone shoots the biggest one, that's often the dominant female that they shoot. What happens when the dominant female gets removed from a group like that? Does another one just step up and take her place, or does it really cause a lot of problems?
There's a social hierarchy structure. So at the top of the ladder would be the old matriarch. And if she gets taken out, then it's often one of her daughters that actually takes over her position, because she's a sort of dominant hierarchy. It's almost like a royal family type of thing. And very often it's one of her daughters will take over from her. But it's not to say that every time you shoot the biggest hyena, it's the matriarch. It's just that the larger hyenas are generally females.
Okay, fair enough. Are hyena dangerous to humans?
Oh, very much so. When I used to hunt, when we hunted in the Zambezi Valley, we often used to fly camp. You're out tracking buffalo and you give up them on dark and you're out a long way from your vehicle and it's a 4-hour drive back to camp. So we just used to camp next to the vehicle, make a fire, and we always had a couple of stretchers and a bit of grub in the grub box and make a fire and have a cold beer. And one thing that we were really paranoid about was protecting your face, because you're sleeping on the ground or sleeping on a stretcher and a hyena comes up, and anything that's exposed you, because the nights were quite cold there, so you're either in blankets or in a sleeping bag, anything that's exposed is your face. And it's not uncommon for a hyena to come and take a bite out of someone's face. In fact, in our farming community, one of the women in our farming community, she was at a fishing camp at Mangey, which is in the Yaka Savanga Akasanga safari area, and she was really hot, so she was sleeping on the veranda of this fishing camp, and she got a hyena bit her in her face one night, and she was quite badly disfigured with these bites, because those bites are extremely powerful and very, they can be very disfiguring if you get bitten on the face. But in the olden days, the old Africans, when a person got too old and they couldn't sort of keep up, or they would just take them out into the bush and just leave them, and the hyenas would sort them out. So they were a very effective way of getting rid of a body, was just to leave them for the hyena. That's for sure. No, so I don't think not many people have ever been killed by hyena. I've never heard of anybody ever being killed by hyena, but I've certainly heard of people being bitten, especially at night, and then disfigured. And it's quite often you'd encounter in local indigenous people in these wild areas. The person's got half his nose missing, or he's missing his ear, or a big piece out of his cheek. And that would happen because these Africans would go to they brew this potent local brew. They go and walk from village to village and have a good old piss up, and then try and walk back and be so drunk and fall down and just fall asleep in the bush, and then wake up with half their face missing the next morning. So, no, we had to be really careful. So when we used to sleep out, when we used to fly camp, we always used to put camp chairs next to us, protect your head. You slept with your head up against the body of the Land Cruiser, and then on either side you'd put a camp chair or a barrier or a table on its side or something like that, just to protect your head for when you were sleeping out. We never had any problem. We always had a fire going, but and we always used to leave a strip light burning, a 12-volt strip light, just for a bit of light, so that they didn't really used to come around too much if there was a fire burning. But if it was totally dark, definitely they would come into camp. But a fire definitely used to keep them away.
Interesting. Do you have problems, or rather, is it common to have problems with hyenas killing livestock and things like that in Africa too?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was a veterinarian there for 22 years, and the Kroi was the last farming community before Makuti and the Zambezi Valley. And the farmers that farmed to the north of Kroi, it was known as Kroi North. There was a time when, over the same period when the hyena population exploded, some hyenas moved into the farming area, and they used to bite the udders out of beef cattle. And once the cows had its udder ripped out, boy, as a veterinarian, that's a real challenge to try and put that all back together again. And eventually we had a lot of those cows we had to euthanize, because they were just so, you can imagine a cow with a nice big full udder. I don't know, maybe they're attracted to the milk. A hyena just rush in and just with one bite would just rip its whole udder out. And we tried that. We tried to bait that hyena. He was so clever. Eventually we killed him with poison. There's a drug called albucarb. It's also known as Timic. It's a chemical that is used in the tobacco industry. Very potent. And we managed to, because if you had a bait, or you're sitting in a blind and a bait, that hyena was so clever. You always do a 360 around the area first, and he would eventually get to smell you sitting in the blind, because their sense of smell is really good, and he would never come in. So we eventually killed him with poison, which is not a very ethical way of doing it. But it turned out to be a massive female, huge hyena, the biggest hyena I've ever seen, really large. But of course, it must have killed 20 or had damaged about 20 or 30 head of cattle. Those are now just domestic beef cows.
Interesting. Well, so you've kind of touched a little bit on how to hunt hyena. I know some of them, especially the dumb ones, get kind of shot by happenstance, raiding camp and things like that. And you've talked about baiting them. Is there any other common ways that are that hyena are hunted?
Well, the baiting it's a pretty specialized way you go about the baiting, because how you bait for a hyena is pretty similar to how you bait for a lion. A leopard, remember I said a leopard will never approach a bait unless it's got, the bait is covered and it likes to approach so it doesn't expose itself. Well, hyenas are, at night, they're very bold. And you want to shoot them, you are going to shoot them at very light, shooting light or first thing in the morning. So you wanted an open, exposed area where you could see them coming and going, and you wanted to be them reflected against a light-colored background. So in Africa, you get these areas of what they call sodic soil, where the soil is almost creamy white in color. And if you can find a tree in an area like that that's got a big exposed branch, what we would do, we would hang a rack of buffalo ribs or a buffalo forequarter about 5 foot off the ground. Because hyenas got these unique body shape. They've got very powerful shoulders and longer front legs, but their hindquarters are sort of lower and skulking almost. They always got this tail which is tucked between their legs, which gives them, that appearance of a timid, mangy cur type of appearance. So they're very poor jumpers. So what we would do, we would extensively drag the area, use lots of scent to drag it, and then hang the meat out of reach of the hyenas. So that the hyenas couldn't jump, but at the base of the tree, we would wire a few bones. So you give them sort of an appetizer. And then the plan is they find the bait at night, and they eat the bones, and then they hang around looking hopeful all night. And the next morning you come in at about an hour before first light, you get into your blind, and you can hear all the activity going on. And as it starts to get light, you'll see a hyena sitting dog-like patiently under this tantalizing piece of meat that's just out of his reach. And we've actually shot hyena in that situation before, and on the ground in front of him, there's a big patch of saliva. He sits there and salivates all night, looking at this piece of meat that he just can't reach. But in those situations, of course, doing that also attracts the lions as well. And often we would have lions on hyena baits, and we've also had leopards on hyena baits as well. So that's what made leopard hunting so fascinating, is that when you got into that blind at the first thing in the morning, and in the dark you can hear all this activity going on. And as it starts to slowly get light, you can make out these black shapes. And, there could be anything. I mean, I've had some of the situations where had a lion eating on the base, and there was a hyena behind, and in the tree was a leopard as well. So we had all three in one situation. Now that just makes it, such a fascinating, not only just to shoot the hyena, but to see the interaction with the other animals which are also attracted to those same baits. Another fairly successful method to hunt hyenas is to call them. Now that you've got these remote coyote calls, that you can set at 50 or 100 yards in front of you, and you've got a little remote controller, you can select your different calls, and they will definitely come to a call of a dying rabbit or something like that as well. See, on private land where hyenas do occur, it's legal to hunt by calling. In safari areas like the Zambezi Valley, where you hunting by using sound to call was illegal. So we weren't able to do that in the Zambezi Valley. But in areas where it's privately owned, you can get them to come in, because they're inquisitive. They're highly intelligent, and they're inquisitive. They want to see what's going on. And sometimes what you would do, these guys will record like a buffalo calf in distress, a buffalo calf bawling or something like that. And that would be quite a good way of getting our inquisitive hyena to come in to investigate what was going on. But if there's more than one hyena and you shoot one of them, well, the other guy that gets away, all you've done is educated him into that. He'll never come and do that again.
I can imagine that if somehow you were able to record some hyena vocalizations, you could record them in one area and hunt them, and then play that in a different area and get some hyenas to come in and check out these intruders.
Oh yeah, for sure. That would work very well. I mean, even that recording I just played you now would probably work. Just play that in in a completely different area where there's a different clan, and then they would say, "Hey, you've got some intruders," and they'll come belting in to sort them out, and then that would probably work really well.
We've talked a little bit about just kind of what funny looking animals they are, and how they kind of run weird just because of their weird body shape. Does that affect shot placement on them?
Not really. Hyenas are quite easy to kill. They've got a large heart lung capacity, as I mentioned, because they've got this great stamina. Yeah, and we just shoot them straight on the shoulder, boy. If it's broadside side on the line of the front leg, in the middle of the body, that'll be a high heart lung shot, which is usually not immediately effective. And what you've just got to be careful of, if there are any burrows or holes within sort of 100 meters of your bait site, there have been occasions where a hyena is wounded, and all he does is he runs straight for a burrow and disappears underground and dies underground, and then you've got to figure a way to get in there to go and get him out. So in those situations, then we would just shoot them straight on the shoulder blade. You know, that high shoulder spinal shot, which was the shot I described when we were hunting leopard. You're just shooting right on his shoulder blade, and then it takes out the spine, which is underneath it. And that is then he just drops right there. Now, hyenas are really easy to kill. Any caliber cartridge combination that would work for the medium-sized antelope, you know, anything that you shoot an impala with will work for hyena. But because they hunted in danger, the majority of them hunted in dangerous game areas. You know, normally what you would use for your leopard, you would just use for your hyena. But if you didn't have a leopard load, even what you shoot your buffalo with, you know, soft point would work for a hyena because they're only 120-pound animals, so they're not huge.
All right, fair enough. And I guess also too, if you're baiting hyena in one of these areas, like you said, you never know what the heck is going to come into it. So you got to be ready for that too.
Oh yeah, for sure. You don't want to be sitting in a leopard hyena blind with a 30-06 and a nice big angry lioness or lion comes in and comes to investigate your blind. That's what you don't want.
Are they hunted on a quota system? Do you have to get a tag or a license to hunt them, or
yes, definitely. Yes. Now, so definitely in all the hunting areas there'll be a hyenas on quota. You know that, and depending on what the numbers are like, you know, there probably as many leopard are hunted as hyenas are hunted as leopard are hunted. You know, it's sort of about a 1-to-1, I should imagine. But most people are not interested in them because they're not considered a worthy trophy. But I think otherwise. I loved hunting. I loved hunting them because it was a challenge, but also you never knew how the hunt was going to turn out. You know, there could be lots of all sorts of surprises.
You know, was that something that, say, like if you had a guy that was coming out for buffalo or something like that, you know, you got his buffalo kind of early in the hunt, and you spend a few days, you know, towards the end of the hunt going after hyena and plains game, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we would normally try and hunt the buffalo as late as possible in the hunt, you know, because we're looking for it. Because, you know, you wanted the guy to get as much buffalo experience as possible. Most of the hunts were 10 days, and the idea was to shoot your buffalo on your ninth day. But in the evenings and in all the mornings, you know, a hyena hunt fits in really well because you get back from a buffalo hunt in the afternoon, you know, you're a bit tired and weary. You have a shower, and then you can go and sit in a hyena blind where you get up really early. You go into your hyena blind in the first thing in the morning. If you have to shoot your hyena first light, you know, you still got the whole day to go and hunt buffalo. So it fits in really well with those other type of hunts. And especially when we had to shoot a buffalo on every hunt, we had to shoot a hyena on every hunt, you know, it fitted in really well. Because you could normally bait fairly close to camp, and sometimes we even used to bait at the boneyard. You know, there was always, every camp's got a boneyard where, as I explained, you can't take any bones out of the Zambezi Valley. So once you've shot your buffalo and you've taken all the meat off the bones, the buffalo carcass and any of the carcasses from all the impala and that all get chucked at the boneyard. And of course, that used to attract hyenas. And sometimes you just build a blind at your boneyard, you know, which was a couple 100 meters from the back of camp, you know, just where the sort of smell wouldn't affect the camp.
You know, you've talked about how strong their bite is and how it's very, you know, they can just crunch bones like nobody's business. I imagine that they eat a good number of bones, and does that kind of affect the appearance of their droppings?
Oh yeah, their droppings turn out to be snow white. When they dry, they're absolutely white. You know, very easy. And they have latrine sites, so you'll go there and they all poop in the same place. They're actually quite clean animals, you know. So they have what you call latrine sites. So they'll have a den area where they've got especially if it's a large clan, you'll have a number of holes where they all go and sleep underground, or that's where they lie during the day under the ground. But then they'll go to their latrine site, and you'll see they'll all like a poop like in an ablution block. You know, there'll be huge, large numbers of this pure white dung, which is just their latrine site.
Very interesting. Well, like you said, these creatures are just about the exact opposite of what the prevailing image of them is in popular culture, isn't it?
I think exactly the opposite. And that's why people don't understand them and say, I don't want to shoot a hyena, one of those terrible scavengers, cowardly-looking things. What's the hyena is the exact opposite to that. And that's what makes them such a challenge. You know, they're a worthy trophy, and I admire them and I respect them highly because they are very misunderstood. And a lot different to what people think they are.
Golly, I mean, it definitely seems like it. Let's back up here for a second. What is their primary food? Are they mainly going after like those medium-sized plains game animal like impala, zebra, things like that?
From a buffalo from a giraffe and a buffalo all the way down.
Yeah.
Hyenas will kill a buffalo and they'll take anything. But a hyena skull makes a fantastic trophy. What's quite interesting, a hyena weighs 100 pounds and a lion weighs 400 pounds. But a hyena's brain is the same size as a lion's brain, which should tell you something, They are smart, intelligent animals that can communicate. They've got this massive social structure, which is highly complex. And you've got to have an intelligent animal to be able to function in such a highly complex social structure. So I think they're wonderful animals.
Is there such a thing as a trophy hyena?
Well, there is no SCR minimum for a trophy hyena. It just goes on skull size. That's how you would measure a hyena skull. We would measure a lion skull. You would measure a leopard skull, which is the greatest length and plus the greatest width. That's all to do with the editor's discretion. But any big hyena will have a big head and if you to sit on your desk or something like that with those impressive teeth and that big strong jaw. I think a hyena skull makes a fantastic trophy. And also their skin is quite beautiful as well. People make rug mounts out of their skins.
That's interesting. I'm hearing everything that you say about them, and I believe what you're saying. It just seems weird to me that somebody would do that. But it just goes to show how ingrained that kind of misinformation is in people's minds.
Well, this shows you how ignorant you are, John.
Yeah, I mean, really? I mean, that is the definition of it.
Tell me, are there any hyenas to be hunted in your Botswana or your South African concession?
Yeah, there are definitely some there. We had a guy in 2021 shot a brown hyena and a spotted hyena, and that's the only one we've ever only hunt we've ever done. Just because the tags are a little bit challenging to get there.
Right.
But
because those because in the days when a lot of South Africa was a stock farming area, the hyenas were very heavily persecuted because they are effective stock killers as well. You can imagine a hyena getting into a flock of sheep or some, cows or something like that. So, but certainly in like the Zambezi Valley, boy, now the pendulum has swung in the other direction. They say there's lots of lions in the Zambezi Valley now, and that's probably affecting the hyena population. Funny enough, I got a phone call from a PH friend of mine who's busy hunting in Matetsi at the moment, and he said that the place is just overrun with lions. He said, so much so you don't see any buffalo calves. There's just too many lions, which probably tells you that the lions have probably thumped the hyena population as well.
Gosh, in 10 or 20 years, it'll probably be flipped on its head again.
Probably will. There's always this roundabout, swings and roundabouts when it comes to Africa. There are always these fluctuations, populations rise and fall as times change and things like that.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation tonight. I've learned a lot about hyenas. It was very entertaining listening to you talk about them. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
I've got probably one last little amusing story. So often Kath and I, my wife and family, used to go down to the Zambezi Valley and just do impala hunts. We just used to camp on the Zambezi and hunt impala. And my mother-in-law and father-in-law used to come down and spend the odd weekend with us. And my father-in-law was a wonderful character. I loved him dearly, but he was a real mischievous old bugger. And before he got down, he said, please keep me an impala heart. So I put an impala heart in the fridge room. And one evening we were sitting on the banks of the Zambezi. The kids had gone to bed and sitting around the fire enjoying. My father-in-law loved his cigar in the evening, drinking a scotch, and he said, I think I'm going to catch myself a wundu. So where's that impala heart? So I went and got the impala heart out of the fridge, and there he had this massive, powerful fishing rod, and I saw him fiddling around, and he disappeared into the dark, and I heard the reel being cast, and then he came and sat down by the fire and carried on smoking his cigar, and about 10 minutes later, he just had this, something taking his line and running like crazy. And our father-in-law jumped up and disappeared into the darkness. And I was sort of just mellow by the fire, and I could hear this grunting and groaning as he was fighting what I imagined was a massive big wunderfish. But he seemed to be, the sounds of his grunting and groaning seemed to be getting further and further away from the river. So I was curious, and I got my torch and I went shone it on him, and he was facing away from the river, facing backwards. When the rod was bent and his back was arched, and in the light of my torch he caught a hyena, and it turned out he'd planned it, but he'd think all along, because next to where we were sitting there was quite a big open area, and he hadn't cast the impala heart into the river. He cast it into this open area, but he didn't have a hook on the heart. He just took some, piano wire, because when you catch tigerfish, you have to have some piano wire, otherwise the steel trace, and he wound the steel trace tightly around this impala heart, and this hyena had this heart in his mouth, and he was not giving it up for love nor money. And there was my father-in-law behind him with his fishing rod fighting this hyena, and eventually he was winning the fight, and until they got about 10 meters from each other. And I was shining my torch on the hyena, and then the hyena just said, "No, bugger it," and he opened his mouth and spat out this impala heart and ran away. And there was my father-in-law said that's the best fight he's ever had on a fishing rod, was to catch a hyena, not a fish.
You got to be catching a pretty big fish to match the size of a 100+ pound hyena, don't you?
yeah, for sure. That was typical of his nature. He was a real mischievous old bugger. He's passed on now, but I miss him dearly. But that's the type of thing that guys used to get up to in the Zambezi Valley when you've had a couple of scotches.
Well, if you want more stories like that one, make sure you check out Kevin's book, It Shouldn't Happen. He tells that story in there along with a lot of other ones about weird things that happen out in the bush, along with some mischievous stories and mistakes people made and that sort of thing. Very funny stuff. Check it out at thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin. Well, Kevin, once again, great having you on the show tonight. It was a very interesting interview as always, and thanks a lot for joining us.
That's a pleasure, John. I hope your listeners found it interesting.
Now, I know this will shock you, but like Kevin said, The Lion King was wrong. Intellectually, I know most people don't actually believe most of the stuff in that movie. Animals don't talk to each other, and they don't speak English. Lions aren't friends with any of those other animals either, and there's no way a lion, a warthog, and a meerkat would be hanging out together in the wild like that. Even so, it is amazing how other stuff from that movie has seeped into our psyche. The whole bit about the hyenas is a great example. Now, to a certain extent, that movie was just reflecting a lot of the popular narrative about hyenas at the time. But it has also taken a life of its own and has helped perpetuate a lot of misconceptions about Africa in general. Heck, I could probably do a whole podcast about everything that was wrong with The Lion King and all of the problems that have resulted from that movie over the years. In any case, I hope you learned a lot from this discussion on hyenas. They're amazing animals, and they definitely add a lot of flavor to a safari in Africa. Now, while I wouldn't say they are cheap to hunt, a hyena hunt is still much less expensive than a leopard or a lion hunt, but it sounds like it's a pretty darn cool experience that gives you a lot of the same individual experiences and just general hunting experience overall, as is the case with hunting leopard or lion over bait. As we wrap up, please sign up for my email list, huntingguns101.com, and pick up a copy of Kevin's books at thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin. That story about his father-in-law fishing for a hyena that he told at the end of the podcast is a great example of the sort of stories you will find in that book. There are links to all those things in the show notes. Now, the fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your dreams come true. Send questions or suggestions you have about the show to john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com or follow me on Instagram @thebiggamehunter_, and you can send me a direct message that way. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.